I love a great story. And we are in the midst of one right now. We have been going through, as I said, in the book of Ruth, unpacking it slowly. We've made our way from chapter 1 now into chapter 3. And for those of you that hadn't been here the last couple of weeks, Ruth is a beautiful story. And it begins with this woman, Naomi, who has two daughters, her daughter-in-laws, Ruth and Orpah. And her husband is there with them, and each of these daughter-in-laws has husbands of their own, and very early on in the story, they die. And Naomi is left there with their two daughter-in-laws, and she says to them, go back to your mother's house. Go back into the place that you once knew. Perhaps they can provide for you. They can give you the safety, the comfort, the security that you need. And Orpah decides as she goes, and Ruth says unto her, I will not go. Don't tell me to leave you. I will go wherever you go. Your people will be my people. Your God will be my God. And so she goes with Naomi from the land of Moab that they were living in back to Naomi's land of Bethlehem. It's a land that Ruth doesn't know, a land that she has not been a part of. She goes back into Bethlehem, and there she is when she comes across and meets what we are told is a man of great wealth and stature, a man named Boaz. Ruth is out there and she's gleaning in the field. She's taking these grains of wheat and she's gathering them, whatever's left behind when they begin to harvest them. She picks up whatever's left behind so that they could eat it together. She picks up that grain. Boaz finds her and he says to her, make sure that you don't go to any other field. Stay in this field and I'll make sure that my people will leave grain behind for you, that my people will provide for you. And so they leave her behind some grain that's on the floor, and Ruth goes back to Naomi, and she has all of this food that she has been given to her by Boaz. And Naomi asks, who was this man? Whose field did you go into today? And she says to it was this man named Boaz. And we end chapter 2, and Naomi says to Ruth, well, blessed be you. Because God has not forsaken us, God has not abandoned us, God has remained with us. Boaz is one of our kindred redeemers. He is a member of our family whose responsibility it is to take on the women who have been widowed and left behind. And so it's there that we pick up this story here in chapter 3. And it says Naomi has had Ruth been taking care of her for a while, and she finally says to her, Ruth, I need you to have some sense of security. I need you to have some family. I need you to have some home that you can be a part of. And so clean yourself up, get on your best clothes, and go down to the threshing floor. Now, the threshing floor, there's a picture of it on the front of your bulletin, and what it was it's a place that you would go to whenever they would take the wheat grains. And they've taken them off of the stems and they've got them kind of in those bushels, and they stomp on them. They'll get cattle or perhaps large stones, or even if you don't have either of those, the people, they just kind of go and they stomp on these grains. And they go through the process of threshing, which is to separate the chaff from the seed of the wheat. And then once it's all there on the ground, they kind of pick it up and you wait for a breeze to blow. And when the breeze blows, the chaff that's lighter kind of gets blown away from that wall that encompasses everything else. And what you're left with, if you do it properly, is this great seed that you can turn into flour and make bread with. And then the chaff, which is separated because you can't digest it, it's taken apart and it's given to the livestock and the cattle so that they can eat it. And this process was generally done by the men of the community. And so Boaz is there with his other male workers, and they're going through the process of threshing. They've probably got these big animals and these big stones, and they're breaking all of this stuff up. And the good grain is falling to the bottom, and the chaff is being blown off into the wind. And after they're finally done, and they've got this big pile of grain, Boaz goes to the end of it, and he falls asleep. And in the middle of the night, Ruth comes, and she goes to meet with him, to see him. And she goes to him in part because she is asking and wanting something from him, to be covered by him. And it's more than just saying, oh, will you cover me with this garment because I am cold? It's saying, will you be a protector of me? Will you be someone who watches after me? She is offering herself to Boaz to say, I will be with you and remain with you all of my life if you will cover and protect me under your guidance. And so Boaz turns to her and he says, well, blessed are you, because you haven't gone after the younger men. She's come to him, and he's a little bit older in his stage in life, and he says, so I will look after you, but I've got to go and make sure. You see, in the lineage and the family life that they had, there was an order that somebody else had first rights if he wanted to. And so he says, I have to go and I have to ask this guy, but in the meantime, take these extra barley grains home to your mother-in-law. You see, her story had gotten out around town that Ruth was this woman of great noble character. She was a woman who had been willing to sacrifice perhaps the greatest years of her life so that she could take care of her widowed mother-in-law. And she goes and she takes the barley back over, and Naomi says to her, well, I promise you, he will not rest until he settles this matter today. It's kind of a beautiful part of the story, and there's so much going on there. There's so much happening, and I made the comment last week that typically Boaz is referred to as the redeemer in this story. He's the guy that's going to come in and swoop in and kind of take over her, give her a hedge of protection, provide her with the food and the home and the comfort and the security that she needs. But I said, you know what? For me, as I read this passage, I feel like the Redeemer actually is Naomi. You see, Ruth can only hope that she can show up at Boaz's field every day and get a little bit of grain. But it is through Naomi, it's through Naomi's linkage and her association with Boaz that she is able to be a part of their relationship, that she is able to join together with him. As I was unpacking and reading and going through a lot of this, the thing that really kind of jumped out at me was this process of threshing, the process of moving the chaff away from the grain itself. I did some research and kind of dug into what it is that looks like. And what's really interesting about this is an agrarian society. The time in which this story was written, there were people who knew what it was like to go through these processes of threshing and picking grain and making flour and making bread. Everybody kind of knew what that looked like. And so in part what we have in this story, in the middle of the story, is this beautiful metaphor. It's this phenomenal metaphor that says in this process of threshing, we get bread. We get bread that sustains us, we get bread that nourishes us, we get bread that gives us life. But before we get to the bread, we have to get crushed. You see, that process involves something. It involves breaking away the bad from the good. I said in the children's sermon, there's that notion of peanuts and sunflower seeds. I learned a little while ago, and I apologize if there's somebody here from Mississippi that likes this, but people in Mississippi, they like to eat boiled peanuts, and I didn't understand this. I was trying to figure out, what are boiled peanuts? And apparently they take peanuts, shell and all, and they will boil them, and then people eat them because it makes the shell itself softer and chewable and more malleable, and so they eat it like that. It seems very surreal to me because I don't know why you would want to eat the shell of a peanut or a pistachio or any other type of seed. It seems superfluous and unnecessary. You see, but there's a process that has to take place. A process of breaking down and breaking apart to make it digestible. A process before we can get the nutrients of the seed that we have to break apart that which is unnecessary and unneeded. And that process is painful. And the reason that it's so pertinent to this story, the reason it's such a beautiful metaphor, is I think that it is a perfect symbolism for what's going on with Ruth. Ruth hasn't had an easy or good life. It's been a hard life. It has been a life that has involved some threshing. It's a life that has involved some breaking. It's a life where she got married and thought that she was going to have children with this man, but then he dies, and then she's there with her mother-in-law, and she has no other choice but to move to a land that she doesn't know, with people that she doesn't know, in a place she doesn't know, and live there. But in the midst of all of that, there is the possibility and the hope for new life. And in the middle of this story, she shows up at a threshing floor where this man is in the process of separating that which is unnecessary from that which is needed. What's beautiful about the process of threshing is that the grain and the seed itself is heavier. And so when you pick it up and toss it up into the air, the wind would come and blow that chaff away. But the good thing, the sustainable thing, the thing that gives flour and bread and life and sustenance, it goes and weighs itself back down to the ground again. It's almost this tale of what's happening with Ruth. She's had to go through the process of threshing. She's had to go through this process of being broken and torn apart. But in the midst of it, there is a hope for new life coming. Boaz says to her, I will go and ask this other man if he will redeem you. But if not, then I will redeem you. I will provide for you a place of food and sustenance and life and hope and gain. I love the opportunities that I get to be able to do baptism. So Aaron, David, thank you so much for being able to be a part of this for you guys. But I also know that anybody else that's here that has had children will tell you that having kids will involve some threshing. Having children in your life is going to involve a process where sometimes things are going to have to be broken. Things are going to have to be torn apart. You're going to have to separate what is good from what is bad. And that's going to be painful. But at the end of it, you are going to arrive with something even better. You are going to arrive with this piece of grain that will give life and nourishment and sustenance. Every single one of us that is going through life will experience these moments of times like Ruth. Maybe they're not as bad as Ruth's were, but they are our own moments of angst and conflict and trial. And we have to go through that process of being thrust, of almost being broken. And it can feel like it doesn't have a purpose. And not until we get to the end of the story, not until we get to the end result when we see the grain become flour, become bread, which gives life, do we realize what the purpose was the whole time. And sometimes we don't get to see that as the story is unfolding. Sometimes it gets challenging and difficult and hard. But it's the process that shows and gives to us the promises of God's life and love. It is that process of breaking those things up and allowing the grain to fall to the ground, to be used and molded and made into something great and better. And so wherever you are in your life this week, that's my encouragement to you as you go out from this place into your homes and your work environments or wherever it is that you are. In those moments and times in life when you are feeling crushed and torn apart, know and believe that the God who sustains, the God who provides, the God who gives this grace and mercy and love will see you through to the end. Will provide for you the grain which gives the flour which provides a beginning of new life. That's a beautiful part of this story and what that is and what it means to have the boldness to go down to the threshing floor, to do the hard work, to wind up at the place where God gives life. To him be the glory, honor, dominion, and power now and forever. Amen.